Allora guys, welcome everyone to this last lecture of the spring 2025 at Kent State University Florence. I'm proud and honored tonight to have here Professor Vera Gheno from the University of Florence. And tonight the topic that she will develop, the title is the following: Is there a problem with Italian? ? The challenges of a binary language facing a fluid reality. Here we go. Fluidity, gender, language, inclusion, every kind of possible idea of inclusiveness related to the language. And tonight, Professor Gheno will teach us, will introduce us, will, share with us some topics which will be discussed and analyzed, I hope, and will, I hope, create the beginning of a new discussion on this topic. Vera Gheno is here. Thank you.
Yeah, usually people don't want to be explicit about my age, so they skip the part in which my CV says that I've worked 20 years for the Accademia della Crusca. So I was born and raised inside the Accademia della Crusca, actually. No, I mean, I've been there half of my life, and then I left in 2019 to pursue other things. Anyway, to be very precise, I'm not a sociologist. I'd like to be actually a sociologist, but I'm a sociolinguist. So I have a linguistics background, and sociolinguistics, if you don't know what kind of animal is this thing, it's a crossover between sociology and linguistics. So basically, I am a linguist, but I have also a strong penchant towards philosophy of language, sociology, ethnography, pragmatics, all those situations that you can analyze through language. So I use language to analyze what happens to the individual, as well as to people as part of the society. Okay, so society as a whole, and also the personal story of an individual inside the society, because we are made of these two linguistic dimensions. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but every person has absolutely unique linguistic features. It's like a DNA, a linguistic DNA. There are no two persons in the world who share the same linguistic knowledge. If we could download our linguistic knowledge, like if it were computer data, there would be no two persons with the same linguistic knowledge. This is called idiolect. Okay, everybody has their own idiolect, but at the same time, we are also part of tribes. We don't think about ourselves as a tribal society, but actually we still are very much tribal society. It's just that we are part of more tribes at the same time. So in this moment, the people sharing this space and this semester, it's a kind of tribe. Our families are tribes, our nations are tribes, and so on. And you can understand many things about what keeps together tribes, analyzing their language. So you relate to each other, not only based on your beliefs or your background, but mainly through language. So this is what the sociolinguist works on. And actually, I have two main fields of interest. One is computer-mediated communication, as it was called back when I started doing this stuff. I have been online for 30 years, so I'm a dinosaur of the internet. I've seen many things changing around me in these years, but I have been constantly studying what happens in the digital scenario since 1995, okay? So, yeah. Many things changed. But also it's very interesting to see what's the impact of social media on language, on societies, and so on. And the other big field of interest is kind of banned right now because it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, yeah, and I been trying for a long time to put these two fields together. So I also deal a lot with what happens to minorities online, for example, hate speech, social and digital marginalization, and things like that. So in today's speech, I'll try to highlight some things that are happening in Italian right now, which you probably won't find in your textbooks, even if you study Italian, because most of what I tell you tonight is outside of the Italian norm of the grammar. Okay, so we're dealing with linguistic experiments that have a lot to do with what is happening in the society right now. But before getting there, I want to give you some background information. I don't know how much you know about the structures of languages, especially in Europe, but mainly we have three big linguistic groups. We have genderless languages. On the European territory, mainly Finno-Ugric languages are genderless, which means that both nouns and pronouns are with no gender. Not neutral, bear this in mind, but without gender. Now, actually, I was born in Hungary, and I lived 3 years in Finland when I was a kid, so I speak two of the main Finno-Ugric languages, both Hungarian and Finnish, and they share this, characteristic that both nouns and pronouns are genderless. So basically, I can write a whole book in Finnish or Hungarian without having ever the problem of genderizing the persons I'm talking about, okay? Which is very, you know, cool in a way. We have only one, in Hungarian, we have only one pronoun, which covers he, she, and it's ö. And there is the same in Finnish. In Finnish, it's hen. And hen covers both he and she, and of course it covers also they, the singular they, okay? Then we have the so-called natural gender languages, like English, but also all the Scandinavian languages behave in the same way than English. It means that nouns are genderless, as you well know from English, but pronouns are gendered, okay? So in English you have he, she. And then when gender non-conforming people started to be an issue, then you, as English-speaking people, started to use the singular they, right? So you can talk about a non-binary person using the singular they, like Mason Alexander Park. You might know this actor from Sandman, the series, and they are an actor, okay? This is a singular they. Also, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic, and Danish behave exactly in the same way that English. And then we have the so-called grammatical gender languages. And the main group is the languages that descend from Latin, okay? So Romance languages like French, like Spanish, like Portuguese, like also Italian. Now, if you have been studying a little bit of Italian, you know that we have gendered nouns, and then we have gendered pronouns. The thing about gendered nouns is that when we have to deal with things or abstract concepts, the gender of the noun has nothing or a little to do with characteristics of what I'm naming. So il mare, the sea, is a masculine, but not because it's particularly masculine, it's just a masculine noun. So I know that when you come from a non-gendered language and you have to learn the gender rules in a language like Italian, it's a hot mess, because there are no rules and there is no logic. Why la sedia and il tavolo and il microfono and la bottiglia and whatever? So this usually makes people coming from non-gendered languages go crazy. And also, different languages have different genders. So, for example, il sole, the sun, is a masculine in Italian, but it can be feminine in some other languages, for example, in German. Okay? So it's a big chaos. But when we come to human beings and animals, usually the rule of thumb is that the gender of the noun follows the gender of the person, whatever gender means, okay? So if I see a female-looking person coming inside the classroom, I will refer automatically to this person as la professoressa, the lady professor, or il professore if he looks like a man. So based actually on how the person appears, I will assign masculine or feminine gender to that person, okay? So this is the system so far. Of course, we don't have anything so how can I say, so contemporary as the singular they in Italian. So first question is, if a person from an English-speaking country background who is non-binary or defines themselves non-binary or gender fluid, gender queer, gender questioning, whatever, comes to a place like Italy, comes to a language like Italian, what happens next? I'm getting this question from many people coming from an English background. Hi, I'm a non-binary person. How do I use Italian, which is a binary language? This can be an interesting question to analyze. So, after this introduction, let's get to the point. I will use queer in this context in both ways. You know that queer means, well, outside the gender binary, for example, LGBTQAI+, but it also means, in the old-fashioned way, unusual or strange. So we are dealing with something that in the beginning was outside of the norm. You know, you might know that queer was used for the first time to talk about people referring to Oscar Wilde during his trial. And his trial was, he was under trial because he was gay, basically. Okay, but instead of just calling him as gay, he was referred to as a queer person. So queer, first of all, is a derogatory word to define lesbian or gay or transgender persons. And then the community has reclaimed this word, a little bit like the black community is doing with the N-word, okay? But the situation is less advanced for the N-word. For example, I am a white female. If I use the N-word, it's still perceived as a slur. But queer is liberated from this point of view. So a queer person or a non-queer person can use queer without any derogatory feeling attached to the word. Okay? It's just a sort of umbrella term that covers everything that is outside of the traditional gender, sex, or sex orientation norm. Okay, so keep this in mind because we need this definition as we go further in my presentation. I don't know if you have ever seen this representation of the Italian linguistic space, but if you have ever studied sociolinguistics in any language, you might have bumped into this spatial representation of the language. And you can see that this was made by Gaetano Berruto, actually, an Italian sociolinguist. Basically, you can put every kind of utterance inside this multidimensional space according to the social layers of the person speaking or writing, the situation in which the interaction is happening, the places. For example, if you have been traveling around Italy, you could have heard that in Florence we speak very differently than in Rome or in Naples or in Venice, or I don't know if you have been around doing the classical grand tour of Italy, okay? But in Italy, the distinction between the regions from a linguistic point of view is very active. So we have strong and quite alive dialects everywhere in Italy. And the difference from Italian is striking in some cases. So if you go to Sardinia or Sicily, even if you speak Italian quite well, you probably won't understand the word. Okay? Because the Italian dialect system is made of sister varieties compared to the one that became the national language. The national language is based on the Florentine, spoken by the nobles in the 14th century here in Florence. Okay, so one specific variant of language became the national one. So the others are not dialects of Italian. It's not like a broken version of the national variety, but are sister varieties of the one that became national. So the situation in Italy from a diatopic point of view is very complicated. Then, of course, I can always think of the medium through which something, an utterance happens, and then the time. So, for example, if you think about how you speak, and then you compare yourselves to your parents, you can easily spot the difference. Probably in some phases of your life you have spoken some varieties of juvenile language, whereas your parents probably look at you in disbelief because they don't understand what you say. And it's the same everywhere in the world. I mean, it's not only an English thing or an Italian thing. There is a phase in which, during our teenage, we have to break with the rules of our ancestors, okay, to be very different, and so we speak juvenile slang. Then usually we grow up, okay, and we go back to the norm. But that phase in which we broke with the rules of parents and professors is very important for the definition of ourself, you know, because language has this power of helping us understand who we are. So in search of ourselves, we go out of the street traced by our parents or professors. That's quite normal. So when I started to study sociolinguistics and I came in contact with this, this multidimensional representation of the linguistic space, I thought that it was very cool, and it summed inside it every possible variant of Italian. But actually then, studying especially the margins of the norm, and here I'm referring to all the works written by bell hooks, okay? I understood that I was missing something in this representation, which is power. There is this variant of power, which means that not everybody, actually, who is part of a society can use language in the same way. Now, I don't know if you have ever studied speech acts theory by John Austin, but John Austin says that we do things with words. We achieve things. I mean, when I say, I love you, that's not that is just not just words, sorry, but it changes reality, depending on the relation between who says I love you and the person on the other side. Okay, so I love you can be a life-changing moment because maybe I'm getting married with the person that told I love you to me. If I don't have any particular feeling for the person that said I love you to me, then nothing happens. You know what I mean? But it's not like magic. But in some cases, language, words do things, change reality. If I am a cop, I can arrest you. If I'm your teacher, I can promote you or make you go back to the same, redo your year at school, okay? If I am a mayor, I can get two people married and I say, I pronounce you husband and wife. This changes reality, and so on. And what bell hooks then notes is that not everybody inside of the society is able to do the same, to act in the same way, through words. Because some people that are at the margins of society are depleted of this linguistic power. So if I'm black, my words are less listened at. If I'm a woman, my power of doing things with words is less than a man, because our society still discriminates in many, many different ways. There is one specific way which maybe you might have noticed in your lives. The fact that you are young makes your words, in many cases, less important for society, okay? So you might be in a context where there are adults, and you also have your own opinion, and you state your own opinion, and you are told by the others, oh, but you are just, 20 years old, so your opinion doesn't count that much as mine, because I'm an adult, and you're not. This is called epistemic injustice. I very much like this concept. It means that some persons, based on some characteristics that they have less power of doing things with words. I suggest you to read the 19th chapter of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And there is a very, very clear scene in which Elizabeth refuses the marriage proposal by Cousin Collins, with the hateful character, horrible character, because she's already in love with somebody else. And it's a 3 or 4 pages long piece of this chapter in which Elizabeth continues to say, I am not interested in you. But of course, not in such an open way, because, you know, there were social norms. A woman could not just say no. And Collins continues to say, oh, you're so nice. You say no, but you mean yes. And this is something that women experience a lot, even nowadays. Okay, you say no, and the other person thinks that you're saying yes, but you're just being very demure. Something like that. Anyway, Antonio Gramsci, who you might have heard about, at the beginning of the 20th century said this, that actually we are talking about language, but language is only a way of talking of something else. Now think about what is happening today in the world. Gramsci said almost 100 years ago, every time that the question of language surfaces, in one way or another, it means that a series of other problems are coming to the fore. The formation and enlargement of the governing class, the need to establish more intimate and secure relationships within the governing groups and the national popular mass. In other words, to recognize the cultural hegemony. So, we are talking about language, but actually we are talking about something else. We are talking about remixing the power levels inside the society. So we have gone a little bit, we had advanced a little bit, I guess, in the last 10 years, thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, recognizing that the levels of power in the society have had an impact of the possibility of persons of doing things with words. And now it seems that we have come to a complete halt, and we're trying to reinstate that everything was very cool as it was before this whole diversity, equity, inclusion thing, okay? So I don't know if you have ever heard the very own voices of the black people at the end of the era of slavery. Some of them said, I don't understand why we must be liberated, because my boss treats me humanly, with humanity. He doesn't kill me in the fields. He gives me some rest. He gives me food. And by the way, I understand why I was enslaved, because I'm black. So it's not completely unheard of that the persons, how do you say, the persons that are discriminated accept the discrimination as natural. And it has, for a long time, been this way. So LGBTQIA+ people that think about themselves as degenerated, black people that think about themselves as less valuable, and as well as disabled people, and so on. So think about this, what the thing that Gramsci says here, and think about what is happening now in the world, and think about how this is so much contemporary even now. This is so up to date, even if it was written 100 years ago. So when we talk about language and power, what are we saying? Well, of course, those who have power in a society have also the power of defining the linguistic norm. So if you adhere to this norm, you can be part of the power group. If you don't know the norm, you are outside the power group. So this is why actually we teach language in school, because language is a way of opening a dialogue with those who have power, and maybe in some cases an educated person can also, become a new figure of power. But also people who have power can decide what can and cannot be said and written. Think about the concept of cancel culture and wokeness, and think about again what is happening now with all the ban of several words. You cannot even study some fields right now, okay? One of the power is how to call the others. Now, there is a very interesting discussion in Italy about the legitimacy of using in public situation the N-word, okay? I don't use it, not even in Italian. And I'm very, rigid about this. Why? Because I work a lot with Afro descendants in Italy, so people that are Italian but are African background. And one thing that they told me, that they have always been telling me, is that for them, the N-word, even if in Italian, is like a slap in the face. So why should I go around to slap people in the face using publicly the N-word? But many, even colleagues, linguists, Italian white linguists, say that it's okay in Italian to use the N-word because it comes from Latin, Latin adjective niger, nigra, nigrum, which is the base actually of the N-word, and also of the word used in Spanish as well for black. Okay, and so based on the etymology, they say that in Italian you can use publicly the N-word. Now this is one of those cases of power imbalance, because it's a white person saying that it's okay to use a slur for the black people. And the opinion of the black people in Italy is not even considered. Again, we are going back to the concept of epistemic injustice, okay? Because they are black, their opinion is not that relevant as much as Italian people studying, white people studying this kind of thing. So one of the side effects of the imbalance of power inside language is that you can use language to perpetuate hegemony, so to keep the power for yourself. You decide what can and cannot be said, and so you keep the power in your in-group, and you close out of the group of power those who do not adhere to that norm from one reason or another. So this is why I like to remind bell hooks, and I know that it's written with big B and big H, even if bell hooks wrote the name with the small initials. But this is actually the real cover of one of this essay that was written by bell hooks, and in the original edition it was written with a big B and big H, so this is just a screenshot, okay? I would not write the name bell hooks like this. And what is written here is very nice for me. I am located in the margin. I make a definite distinction between the marginality which is imposed by oppressive structures, and that marginality one chooses as site of resistance, as location of radical openness and possibility. And this is from 1990. So the margin as a location of radical openness and possibility. One other thing that bell hooks writes is that there is no center without a margin. Okay, so to understand the concept of margin, there must be a center, but it also the other way around. So can we use the margin as a place of resistance instead as something that is just there because there is a center? You know what I mean? This is my position. This is my stance in this situation. I still pose myself on the margins, but I think of the margins as a place of radical openness and possibility. And this is the stance from which I also analyze what happens inside languages. Now, very briefly, because as always, okay, it's not that bad. I thought it was worse. Okay, I still have a couple of minutes. Very briefly, if I study specifically Italian language, I can spot two main periods. Traditionally, as all the gendered languages, Italian uses the overextended masculine as the base of language, okay? So, for example, in a mixed context like this, traditionally I would say buonasera a tutti, using the overextended masculine, even if there are women here, even if the majority are women. Okay? Because the Italian rule says that if I have 50 women and 1 man, I should switch to overextended masculine. Okay? So I have a yoga class and I have 1 male participant. In Italian, I would say, now tutti fate questo. This is the rule by the book of grammar. How is this motivated? Think about it. Is it just a random grammatical rule? Or is it in any way linked to the structure of our society? the traditional structure of our society. Remember that in Italy, Italian women got to vote in 1948. So, you know, less than 100 years ago. Until 1975, which is my year of birth, just to, you know, make keep things in perspective, the laws regarding the family changed so that there was, until 1975, if you abused of a woman, if you raped a woman, then you could marry her to repair the rape. Think about this. So if a woman did not want to be with a man, the man could abuse of her and then ask for her hand. And so at that point, he was not a criminal anymore, considered a criminal anymore. Okay? 1975. Not so many, 50 years ago, this was still possible. So, you know, I have to say that it's very difficult for me not to see the patriarchy here. These are examples of a good, old, traditional patriarchal view of society and of family. The woman must be married and must have kids to, you know, be a complete woman. This is her biological destiny. And this has been ongoing for a very long time in our societies. And actually, even if the laws have changed, and technically today there is equity in the law, so there is no biological discrimination from a biological point of view between men and women, but in reality, Italian society is still very traditional from many points of view, okay? So this overextended masculine is not there by chance. It's linked to the androcentrism, the male centrism, the masculinity of our society. Men do things, women follow. If you open a book of literature, of Italian literature, most of the authors will be male. Even if we have 1,500 published female writers in Italy since the beginning of the printing era, since the 1600s, okay? So there are many, many women from, that we could study, but actually here in Italy the tradition is still very masculine. The canon, the literature canon, the philosophy canon, the art canon, they're all male-centered. So this overextended masculine has a strong link with the, or a strong connection with the structure of our society, which is traditionalist. So in 1986, Alma Sabatini, who was a linguist and also a politician, a leftist politician, was asked by the Italian government to make a field survey on Italian to understand how sexist is Italian language. And she writes this, il sessismo nella lingua italiana. You see, it's not il sessismo della lingua italiana, it's sexism in Italian language, not sexism of Italian language. Because what she discovers, what she says, what she argues actually, is that Italian per se is not sexist, because it already possesses all the instruments, all the vessels to be used in a non-sexist way. But what is really sexist, what was really sexist in 1986-87 was the use of Italian. For example, she says, professional women, as soon as they get a top position, they tend to use the overextended masculine to define themselves. Okay? So, for example, il direttore, even if it's la direttrice, l'avvocato, the lawyer, even if we have l'avvocata, and so on. And she said, we should use the feminine forms more, because the more we use them, the more we get used to them. And the more we get used to them, the more we get used to the fact that in all roles we can find either men or women, and it's the same. But this is an issue that it's still going on a lot, because if you think about it, our prime minister, I would say, Giorgia Meloni, asked specifically to be called with a masculine title, il Presidente del Consiglio, whereas it would be, for the Italian grammar, la Presidente del Consiglio. Okay, Presidente is it has two genders, can be il Presidente or la Presidente. It's enough to change the article. But despite the ease with which you could change the gender of the word, she has decided to be called with a masculine noun. Why? Because it's more it's perceived as more honorific in the masculine form instead of the feminine form. Now, if I make a comparison with English, English does not have this necessity to show the feminine form, because the words actually do not have gender. So if you have listened a little bit to what is happening in English right now, most feminine forms are being taken out of use by feminists themselves. For example, Kate Blanchett refers to herself as an actor, not an actress. But because you do not need in English to say actress to stress on the fact that she is a woman, because actor already covers both masculine and feminine by itself, the word, okay? So English can go towards a degenderization. Police officer instead of policeman and policewoman, actor instead of actor and actress, spokesperson instead of spokesman and spokeswoman. Italian cannot do this because it has a different structure, as I recalled in the beginning. And even if we stay inside the binary, we already have this discussion going on. Now, I don't know if you have ever seen this. This is the genderbread person. Of course, it's inspired by the gingerbread man. And this is an easier way to put all together on the same drawing all the 4 dimensions of what is now called the gender identity, which is the identity, the attraction, the expression, and the biological sex, okay? I leave you this PowerPoint so you can browse through it and find some more context if you're interested in this. But I show you this just to make you understand that until recent years, we just thought about the world of human beings made up of men and women, and that was about it. And today, thanks to what is happening inside biology and medicine and the study of DNA, and also philosophy, think about Simone de Beauvoir or Judith Butler or Paul Preciado, we know much more about the gender identity than even 10 or 15 years ago. Okay, so being this the situation, if you compare to what I've said so far, it seems that there is a discrepancy between what a language like Italian can represent with the masculine and feminine, and what we know about the complexity of gender identity of human beings, apart from seahorse. How is it seahorse? Is it seahorse? The cavalluccio marino? Okay. Seahorse, you know, the seahorses are the male seahorses are the ones that get pregnant. Or that we have fish that change their sex during the course of their lifetime. Or that we have gay penguins. So, you know, even the animals are not so rigidly binary as we have thought about them so far. So imagine human beings that have a brain and have this cerebral activity that is much more complex than most of the other species of animals, okay? So, this is a quote in English from a very nice book by Guy Deutscher. I highly recommend it. It's called Through the Language Glass. And it's very nice to read, actually. It's not per se an academical essay. It's very nicely written, but he's a linguist. And he says, consider this example. Suppose I say to you in English that I spent yesterday evening with a neighbor. You may well wonder whether my companion was male or female, but I have, in English, the right to tell you politely that it's none of your business. But if we were speaking French or German, or even Italian, I would add, I wouldn't have the privilege to equivocate in this way. because I would be obliged by the grammar of language to choose between vicino and vicina, I would say for the Italian. So in Italian, I cannot say, I spent yesterday evening with a vicino, vicina. Now imagine if I say vicino. I am a woman, I spend the evening with a male companion. In your brain, you think about a certain narrative. Probably it was a romantic meeting. If I tell you that I was with the vicina, the narrative changes completely. And I'm unable to avoid telling you about the sex of my neighbor, even if I didn't want to. Can I work around it? Yes, I can say in Italian, ho passato la serata di ieri con una persona che vive vicino a me. With a person, I spent yesterday evening with a person that lives next to me. But in that case, in Italian, it becomes clear that I'm trying to avoid to give you an information that I would normally give to you, the sex of my companion, okay? So these languages compel me to inform you about the sex of my companion, whether or not I feel it is remotely your concern. This does not mean, of course, that English speakers are unable to understand the differences between evenings spent with male or female neighbors, but it does mean that they do not have to consider the sexes of neighbors, friends, teachers, and a host of other persons each time they come up in a conversation, whereas speakers of some languages are obliged to do so. Now imagine you English-speaking people there to genderize the persons you're talking about all the time. This means that a gender non-conforming person has no space in a language like Italian, okay? Is this a problem? Well, for me, yes, because I always think that we inhabit a language more than a nation. This is something that Emil Cioran, a Romanian poet, says. So if I'm inhabiting my language with ease, why should I take away this possibility from others? So I think that this, this thought is completely legit. If you don't feel represented by masculine and feminine, then go and find some other way of expressing yourself. Because language is a place in which people can, try new solutions. Probably somebody came up with this specific use of the singular they in English, and then it kind of worked, and the community started to use it widely, okay? We don't have anything that can be compared to the singular they, but the discussion is there. And, well, non-binary, gender non-conforming persons have always existed. It's not a new thing, it's not a fashion thing. It's just that in the moment that they were called with a name, non-binary or gender non-conforming, we in Italy started to see the existence of these people, because, you know, the names, the nouns defining something make that something more visible to the eye. Okay, it's not that language creates reality. We're not in the world of Harry Potter. I cannot change reality through magic. But when I nominate something, that something becomes visible because we can talk about that thing or that person or that characteristic, okay? And so this is the situation we have in Italy. And, you know, when Italian is not enough for me, when the gender of the referent is not known, in English you say somebody left their umbrella here. I hope they come back for it. In Italian I would say qualcuno, using the overextended masculine. And then if I find out that it was Vera who left the umbrella here, I'll say, ah, okay, è Vera. But in the beginning I used the masculine. When referring to a mixed multitude, buonasera a tutti. A little bit better, buonasera a tutte e tutti, okay? Good evening to tutte and tutti. But tutte and tutti still do not cover the variety of human beings, okay? When also referring to a person outside of the gender binary. And of course, Italian, changes the ending of many elements of the phrase. Okay, you have the adjectives, you have the past participles, you have many, many things that can be changed inside the phrase. So it's not a lexical question, how do I call non-binary persons, but how do I change a morphology to accommodate in Italian also those who do not fall into masculine and feminine form. Now, the big question is, can the morphology of a language be changed? I think yes. It depends on what we want to do with language. Now, just to give you some raw data, it's calculated that in the world, the gender non-conforming people right now are around 5% of the population, between transgender, non-binary, blah, 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 genderqueer, gender fluid, two spirits, and so on and so on. 5%, it seems a very small part of the population. Well, now think about what would happen if 50% of the population declared themselves gender non-conforming. Probably, even in a place like Italy, the consistency of the discussion would change radically. Okay? So I'm open to the possibility that in 50 years, probably I won't see it, but maybe my daughter will, the things will be ripe enough to even change Italian morphology. Is that a problem for me? No, because I see linguistic change as completely natural. And in the end, language goes where the community goes. I think that whatever happens today in society, we know too much about the complexity of human beings to go back to what we were before. And for me, this opening towards the idea of human beings as on a spectrum of gender instead of a binary gender is an enrichment for human beings, not a problem. And it's not something that challenges those who feel themselves as a cisgender, you know, and inside the norm. It's just an opening towards the vastness of diversity. From my point of view. So, just to finish, because I have talked too much, as always, I just wanted to show you this. No, this is much better. One of the solutions, of the experimental solutions that came up in Italy in the last 10 to 15 years is the use of this letter that you see in the second row of this writing, which is not an A, it's actually called the schwa. And it's a symbol of the IPA, of the International Phonetic Alphabet. It is the symbol for the mid-vowel, which you use a lot in English. It's the final sound of the, or the initial sound of about, this. And in other languages, the LGBTQIA+ communities could pick something else. For example, the Spanish and the Portuguese had the E free in their morphology, so they adopted the E as the inclusive version for adjectives and pronouns. So you might find things like whatever, para todos, todas, todes. Okay, this todes is an inclusive form that is not todos, not todas, it's something else. It's not masculine, it's feminine, it's an inclusive form. In the same way, in Italy, some groups started to use the schwa. Okay, because we did not have any free vowel in the system except of the U, but speaking with the U it's not considered very elegant, okay? Tutto, buonasera tutto, something like that. So some people started to use the schwa. There has been a lot of discussion on this. I leave you some material on the schwa, because if you see the discussion, it's much easier than talking about it. But it's very interesting for me that in this moment, we have a discussion in the academic field. Many of my colleagues say that all this thing about gender fluidity is just a fashionable thing, so it's not really a problem. I personally know too many gender non-conforming persons to think about the issue from this point of view. And so I have become not an advocate for the use of the schwa, but just somebody who studies the phenomenon of these linguistic experiments as something interesting, and I'm not judgmental about it, okay? When I started to study the schwa, actually that was the end of my academic career. Not really, because even those who taught me that there is nothing unworthy of being studied in a language. Actually, there is a saying in the Italian linguistic community, language is like a pig. You don't throw away anything. You know, no part of the pig is thrown away. If you, slaughter a pig, traditionally, in country cultures, all the pig is used up. You don't throw away parts of the pig. And the language is like the pig. Okay? So when I discovered this phenomenon, I was thrilled by it, that some people came up with this invention. Probably, as somebody in English discovered the singular they, that dates back to Shakespeare, but was not used for non-binary persons. And so in the academic field, there is a lot of pressure not to study this phenomenon as unworthy of being studied. But in the meanwhile, this is what happens outside the academia. The schwa can be found, for example, in writings on wall, which is quite cool, I guess. So this is a way of signaling that the binary system of a language like Italian, in this moment, does not mirror the whole complexity of the human being, of the gender dimension of the human being. Where will this all go? I have no idea, but I'm eager to study what will happen in the next years, because, as I told you, I don't think that we will get back to a binary system with ease, because in the meanwhile, these people have come out, and I hope that they do not have to disappear for another time. For another time, okay? I hope that they will continue these experiments wherever they will bring us. We are completely outside of the norm, and the schwa will never become a new norm. It just signals that the norm, as we have known it for so many years, is not enough. There is this other book that I encourage you to read. It's in English as well. It was written in German, but there is also Italian and English translation. It's called Speaking and Being, and Kübra Gümüşay is a German journalist and activist and writer who is, by the way, a Muslim. So it's very interesting for me, the intersection of levels in her book. And she writes this very interesting phrase from my point of view: if our language works for us, we do not perceive the substance of our thinking, we do not see the architecture of our language. We perceive the walls and limits of language only when it no longer works, only when it forces us, when it takes the air away from us to breathe. So even if you think about this whole issue as something that has nothing to do with you, remember that it can be a key issue for somebody else, okay? So we cannot just turn our head saying this is not a problem. For somebody, this binary structure of Romance languages is a problem, and I think we have, as a whole society, take this in consideration. Okay, thank you. Sempre troppo.
So thank you very much for this fantastic presentation. I have a question, if I may start, which is the following. You talked about the morphology of the language. Can it be changed? And you were referring to il presidente or la presidente. So in other words, do we have time to wait 50 years for having this changed, or should we have, or can we have potential opportunity, and how? That's the question. Can we do that? Because you talked about the fact that languages are referring to sociology and the society. So, but I think we don't have time anymore, and the binary language, Italian, is so difficult to approach nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say that, yeah, but I think you can hear me. From here as well? Okay. I have to say that linguistic as well as social changes are very long, are very slow. We all want the revolution, especially when we're young. But the idea of changing the structure of society and the structure of language is something that covers the whole extension of our lives and even much more. So I'd love to see the change in my lifetime, But I also know that even if I don't see that change in my lifetime, I'm participating to a bigger picture, okay? Thomas More, you have maybe read the Utopia by Thomas More. In one passage, he writes that maybe we will never get to the utopia, to the utopian world we are thinking about, but also the road getting us closer to utopia is worthy to be walked. My significant other, my partner, he's a physicist, and he's working on one of the biggest international projects that are on in this moment, which is the nuclear fusion project. Okay, there are two projects in the scientific world that do not have sites. Everybody's participating: the US, China, Russia, European Union. One is the ISS, and one is the nuclear fusion project, because it will change the destiny of humanity. And he's 63, so he says, I'm perfectly aware of the fact that I won't see a nuclear fusion reactor on in my lifetime, but this does not mean that I'm not working full speed towards nuclear fusion, which is the reaction that keeps the sun on, by the way, because I know that we will get there, maybe in 30, maybe in 50 years, but we will get there. And I try to have the same stance, even if I know that it's essential for younger people to feel that something will happen during your lifetime, okay? But I mean, if we didn't have feminism in the end of the 1800s, we wouldn't be here today. So baby steps, okay?
Questions?
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was super interesting.
Thank you.
My question, I guess, is sort of, what is your opinion and what have you seen about the ways that other cultures have impacted the way Italy looks at language? For example, the US using the singular they, or even other languages, like you said, Hungarian and Finnish, having genderless nouns and pronouns. I guess especially within the current political climate, how much other cultures have been affecting the way Italy views language as well.
Thank you. That's a very nice question, by the way. Being a speaker of Hungarian and Finnish, and so knowing the political situation in Hungary and in Finland, and also the situation of how do you say, the openness toward the queerness, I would say, of the two countries, it's very different. Okay. 30 years ago, my father was was a visiting professor in Finland, and that's why I lived there with my parents for 3 years when I was a kid, from 10 to 13. And my father had an openly gay colleague, and even 40 years ago, sorry, it's a long time. 40 years ago, it was already perfectly, just a matter of fact. He's coming to dinner with his partner. End of the story. I've never had here a queer professor, openly queer professor. We of course, about people in the closet, but even today, it's less difficult today, but it's not something that is not frowned upon even today. So Finland has always been very open on queerness, I would say. Whereas in Hungary, I prefer not to be queer in Hungary, I would say. I have not been back to my home country since the COVID, because dealing with the DEI as ideal can become a problem there. I don't feel safe, I have to say, even if I'm cisgender and heterosexual, so it's not a problem for me, but I was asked not to touch these issues once I was invited to keep a conference in Hungary, so I stay away for now. Anyway, this means that the inside structure of the language by itself is not enough to grant an openness of mind. But what is really, and this is also an argument used against my work, if openness of mind were linked to the structure of language, then Hungary would be a paradise for queers, okay? But let's try to reverse this thing. There are some very cool websites that put together all the queer efforts going on in different languages. And we can right away understand that in all the languages that have behind them a quite open society towards queerness, the same thoughts are brought into a linguistic thinking, even if the structure of the language impacts on the solutions found. So if you look at German, German uses the so-called Mittelpunkt, the middle point. So they put together the, how to say, the masculine and the feminine form, they fuse them together with a middle point. So for example, Lehrer would be student, male student, Lehrerin is female student, and they put them together, Lehrer, point, in. So it means that it's both together, and something like that is also used in French, okay, with this Mittelpunkt or asterisk or something to put together the two morphologies, masculine and feminine. In Spanish and in Portuguese, they use this E, okay, so amigos, amigas, amigues. But they had the E free, that was very cool for them. So in English, you are avoiding the genderized forms, favoring in the use the genderless forms, like I said, police officer instead of policeman or policewoman. So every language that is quite open toward this stuff has found some linguistic solutions or experiments, okay? I leave you this PowerPoint so you can check that I have listed some of the experiments that are ongoing in Italian, because of course I did not have time, as always, to show them to you, but yeah, here you see all the symbols that have been used in Italian, from the asterisk to the @ sign to the bar to the apostrophe to the X, so to be tut X with the X. The problem with the majority of these solutions is that they cannot be brought into spoken language. The only two solutions for spoken language are the U and the schwa. So if the phrase is tutti I bambini sono pregati di lavarsi le mani, all the kids are asked to wash their hands, it would be tutto u bambino sono pregatu di lavarsi le mani with the U, and tutte e bambine sono pregate di lavarsi le mani with the schwa. They both sound very alien compared to the norm of Italian. And there is one extra thing I wanted to add, and then I close my mouth. The U sounds like Sardinian dialect, okay? Because it's the way it's mocked as well. And the schwa sounds like Neapolitan, so the dialect from Naples. In Italy, there is a lot of racism towards the southern regions, okay, which are referred as terroni. You might have heard this slur. It's like the N-word, but for people from southern Italy. So one of the problems, I think, posed both by the schwa and the U is that they make you sound like you were from southern Italy. And this is not something that is favored in Italy. Okay, it's uncool to be from southern Italy. Of course, I don't feel like this. I'm just, reporting something.
Grazie mille. Thank you so much. This is really interesting. What I found particularly intriguing is that graffiti. Mm-hmm. And so I went, because this morning I was rushing because I had to come here. I was writing a formal message to colleagues, and I say, cari colleghi, and I that line, and I went. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I should have put cari colleghi, cari colleghe. If I had that sign there, I would have rushed. But then I'm thinking, it's easy. So I went to check on my WhatsApp now if I can find the symbol. I can't.
Yes, you can. It's under the E.
Okay.
If you push the E for a longer time, then extra letters come up.
Okay, you need to know that there is the symbol. You need to insert the symbol in the Word document in the email. So is the change that you're talking about that is going to happen in the traditional way through graffiti and words and not through Word document?
You know, you're highlighting something that, from my point of view, should be discussed more, because it's also a question about written versus spoken language. Usually changes are in spoken language first, and then they sediment themselves in written language. Is it possible that due to the digital era in which we are living, some changes could come from written language and then move to spoken? I mean, this is a scientific question I am thinking about a lot, because when we say that all the changes come from spoken language, well, it was in a pre-digital era. Now we speak and write. The difference is not that open. I mean, when you write on WhatsApp, you're not really writing. You're using a sort of Creole version, something. Yeah, it's a crossover between written and spoken language, because formally it's digitized. Yeah, also. So that's the first question. And then the second is, I want to tell you that there has already been a change, because I remember quite clearly that 5 years ago, the schwa was not present, even if you pushed the E go to WhatsApp and push the E for a longer time. It's exactly as the lettere con accenti. It's the same. They are the extra words. Okay, you see? And first, it was introduced by Android around 2020, and in 2021-22 by Apple. So they got the message. They got the message that something was going on in Italian, and they inserted this specificity into their keyboards. So what's next? Well, for example, it would be nice to have it on the actual keyboard of computers, right? Because for now, you have to go to the character map to find the schwa. So it's a little bit tricky to get there, but it's there. I use the schwa when I write. With a very small number of occurrences, because it becomes difficult to read the text with the many schwas. But yeah, if I have to refer, for example, to an actor, a non-binary actor, I would write attore with a schwa.
Time for another question.
Ciao, thank you so much. So I'm curious because, so you mentioned that, right, this isn't like language that we would use like in the center of society, right? But in like the fringe, right, it's becoming more and more common, and definitely more so in English than Italian. But I'm curious because, so I'm a theater student, art student, whatever. We're definitely more progressive. I'd say more on the fringe. And pronouns are something that like, it's second nature to me now, right? First day of class, your name, your pronouns, whatever. Like I don't even think about it anymore. It's like, okay, he, she, they, what, it doesn't matter, right? And I'm curious if there's any sort of practice for sharing pronouns in Italian, whether that's like, rather if it's just like somebody who's male presenting that is actually female identifying and they share their pronouns, or some sort of along the spectrum, if there's any sort of like language for that.
Well, that's another very interesting question. First of all, I saw in the last months that even in English-speaking context, it's less common now to use the pronouns. For example, they were on the mini bios in Instagram, and now they are not there anymore. So what's happening in the political world has already had some consequences on the digital instruments we are using. I have always found the practice of stating your pronouns as very cool, because it, makes everything clear. Hi, I'm Vera, my pronouns are she, her, and everyone knows who I am, how I identify myself. I think it's a nice measure. We do it in Italian, in queer contexts especially, and of course, you know, in English you have the they, but you have also the these, you have other experimental pronouns. And so people can choose more than just the they, them, he, she, he, her, and whatever. And in Italian, many people use many. I mean, the few people that are political about their identity, they use lei, which is not lui, not lei, but el schwai, lei, or loro, which is like the singular they. So there is some experimentation there as well. I have to say that as Italian poses much more problems, you know, to adapt to this new reality, I would say, most of the non-binary friends I have tend to use the pronouns of the opposite gender of the one you would assign to them looking at them. I present myself as a female looking, but I use male pronoun, masculine pronouns, and vice versa, which creates a sort of distortion, which forces you to think about the gender of the person you are referring to. Which is, I think, it's a workaround that is kind of cool, because, you know, I present myself as very feminine looking, and as I sono molto curioso, and this brings to attention something, you know, in any context. And I think that's cool that they found this workaround until we don't have a widely recognized genderless pronoun. Like the yell in French. They created the yell in French to cover this, this part. There's a hand here, behind you.
Hi. Thank you so much. That was really good.
Thank you.
I was wondering what your thoughts are on the impact that social media has on the evolution of language, and if that impact would be long-term or kind of short-term as social media typically is.
First, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to tell you a small trivia. When I worked on my BA thesis, it was 2002, and I wanted to analyze the language of news groups, so of virtual communities. The social networks, social network sites as we know them today were non-existent at the time. And my professor asked me, well, are you sure that this is a material for a BA thesis? Because this phenomenon of the virtual communities is a bonfire. It's going to go away in a couple of years because people prefer to meet in person. And then, you know, 20 plus years later, we live in an on-life. We know that social media and online are part of our existence, that is not disputed anymore. So anyway, the impact of social media is the impact that any other new channel of communication has had on language. So there is a certain degree of adaptation by any language to the new communicating channels. That by itself is not a problem. It's an enrichment, I would say, of the linguistic panorama, of the landscape. There is one thing, though, that makes social media special compared to the print or the radio or the TV, which is pervasiveness. We tend to stay too much on social media because they are immersive. The algorithms make social media very comforting, and it's so much easier to browse to the reels on Instagram than reading a book. Which means that our problem right now is to have a varied media diet, which in many cases we do not have. People tend to spend too much time on social media. And if you spend too much time on social media, that can have bad effects on your communicating skills, because the mono variety is never good, okay? It's like, let's compare social media to fast food, okay? It's like the French fries, the social media or the French fries of communication. There's nothing bad in eating French fries from time to time, but you know what happens if you eat only French fries, okay? and it's not good for our health. So we should eat some, brain salad, books, some, if you are not vegan, some proteins. Okay, let's say on veganism, on safe side, I don't want to trigger anybody, but some proteins, the pyramid of eating, right? And it should be the same for cultural products. So the only real problem is that you become so lazy that you do not do anything else than just being on social media. Then it can have a bad effect also on your language. In all the other cases, no. I spend a lot of time on social media, but I also read, go to the movies, go to theater, read poetry, read graphic novels. Remember that words are not only in books, they are everywhere around us. But if we eat several varieties of media, it's better. Okay.
Any other question? Okay, thank you very much, and have a good night.